Okay, hello everyone. My name is Cory, and my presentation is about the history and a couple other details about MiniDisc, which is a portable digital audio recordable format that Sony introduced in 1992. You can, see, oh no, that's okay. See a disc right here. Heck, oh no, I probably should have. The discs are about a quarter of the size of a CD. They were introduced in 1992 following Sony's and Philips' joint introduction of the compact disc in 1982. The idea kind of being that if you bought vinyl records, big, and wanted to listen to them on the go, you'd use compact cassette tapes. There wasn't really anything suitable to the increase in quality that CD brought for the digital era. So Sony and Philips each went their both way, and Sony came out with the little discs, or mini discs. Sorry, they're just little. That is it. That's that. Oh no, I didn't rehearse this. I'm so sorry. I also didn't sleep last night, so it's cool. Mini discs are, as I said, recordable. The idea being that CDs, you can take them along with you, but they kind of suck to use on the go. I have a CD player with me, and this is honestly quite a late model, quite a new machine, but it is significantly bigger than the mini disc machine, even for how new it is. Both of those are basically the size of the disc inside them. And as a recordable media, what you do is connect a digital cable between the two. Sorry, this is going to be awkward, but then it'll be over. Oh no, actually wait. I make it so that the CD's on the... I didn't do super good in geometry as a kid. And we're just gonna come around the other side here, I'm sorry. Oh no. Everyone's gonna be all like, hey, remember the worst presenter at VCF? Okay. And then you put the disc in. Okay, and then it makes a cute little noise. And then the whole sell on this thing is that recording from a CD to a mini disc is basically a one-touch operation. That was 2 touches technically. Can you see that? Maybe. There we go. That doesn't actually matter, just look at how easy it is. That's pretty much it. You can record onto it. The tracks, once you record onto them, the information about them is stored in a table of contents, so you can move the tracks around, delete specific tracks, record new information in. Because it's all digital, it's just ones and zeros. There's no hint of the previous information still available. That's what it is. This is one of the ways to make a disc. There's a couple other options. Sony had integrated units that had a CD and a mini disc drive together. You press just one button and it copies. Units that could go faster than real time, because this is happening in real time. If you plugged a headphone port into either of those, you just listen along. Mini disc was pretty niche here in the United States, mostly because Sony didn't market it, potentially because Sony didn't know how to market it, because CDs were very cheap in the United States, about $10 a piece by the mid-1990s. The place where MiniDisc really got going was Japan, where CDs cost about $30 to buy. So when a CD costs about $30 to buy, it makes sense to rent them for a night and then copy them to a disc that you can buy for a couple bucks, even with the cost of the machine to record them and the time and effort that you take. Oh, I took the worst notes. Can you imagine that? Someone who didn't sleep last night? In 1998, they did try to relaunch the format here in the United States. They ran about 6 months worth of magazine ads only in music magazines, from what I can tell. Advertising, no music was harmed in the making of this disc. They also advertised the reusable nature of the discs and the small size, because in 1998, CD players were just about to catch up to this point where they were almost a little bit bigger than the CD. They didn't not pay attention to North America, though. A little shorter after that, they did the long play format, which uses a new codec at a lower bit rate to store more audio on the discs. You might actually be able to read that machine says MDLP, and it has a picture of 4 CDs going onto one mini disc. I didn't check what mode I used, but you can, in fact, record. That's an 80-minute disc, so it's 320 minutes worth of stuff on it. It does change the sound quality. Sony claimed that the middle format, LP2, 160 minutes, sounds as good as SP. I can't hear that difference. Most people can hear the difference with an LP4. It's kind of like if you get a 64 kilobit MP3. So, anyone who was on LimeWire back in the day. The next part of my note card. The other thing that they did in the early 2000s was increase the amount of computer connectivity with a new technology called NetMD. It's not that new. It's basically, they added a USB port to it and you can dump files onto it faster than real-time files. It's a little bit like burning a CD if you've ever done that, but with a smaller disc and with a different codec of audio. By that time, the battery life has also gotten pretty good. And the other... Man, I'm doing so bad. I'm so sorry, everyone. The other thing that they focused on and that they talked about focusing on in one of their struggles in North America was the price. And part of that 1998 relaunch did include a couple newer machines, and each successive year since then, or from then to about 2004, they introduced a newer, cheaper machine. This one is 2 or 3 generations into that process and would have cost about $180 when it was new. There was one model below it that would have cost about $150. The model that launched in 2003, the cheap one that you see most often on eBay, was about $100 to $120 when it was new. So they did kind of get to that point where you can cheaply use this as an alternative to MP3 players. I don't know if that one makes sense anymore. Let's go through anyway. Again, so sorry. In 2004, they relaunched the format completely to be much more computer-oriented. That's called HiMD, or... No, HiMD is how people call it. And it stands for High Mini Disc, like High 8 or High Beta. No, I'm just kidding. HiMD launched with new 1GB discs, several new audio modes, including you just copy linear PCM from a CD directly, like totally uncompressed audio, as well as being able to use both higher and lower bit rates and do a little more mixing and matching. It was much more computer focused though, and didn't do well in Japan because that's not how people were interacting with MiniDisc there. It did do okay here. It was available. A couple people bought them. There's a few floating around. But to be perfectly honest, if you had a computer and it's 2004, an iPod probably made more sense. And that's where people went, especially if you were willing to use some computer software to do this process, at which point Sonic Stage is not that good. Sonic Stage being Sony's software for this. Oh, that should have gone first. I wrote the whole webpage about this and recorded a scripted version that sounds way better. The next piece is file orientation, which is sort of what you probably think about when you manage music on an iPod or an SD card or an Android device, whatever, where your music exists as files that each represent a particular song and they all have their own metadata. MiniDisc, in the classic format, is really extremely physically oriented. It's basically copy a CD onto a smaller version of a CD, whereas HiMD really is what if an iPod but with a removable disc. And that is part of why HiMD failed a lot in Japan. I didn't fail, bad phrasing. It didn't catch on a lot because a lot of Japanese people were pretty much set in the ways they'd developed in 1998 for using the format in terms of doing copies like this or using dedicated equipment to do it. So a lot of what you see in Japan doesn't reflect NetMD, it doesn't reflect HiMD. The machines do exist. There's a couple more of them there just because of MiniDisc reaching cultural touchstone status in Japan, but it's not quite. It didn't. There's more of the classic equipment around, even in situations where a HiMD shipped for longer. Actually, speaking of the rest of the long tail, MiniDisc had and is having a very long tail in Japan. As I mentioned, HiMD was launched in 2004. New hardware came out in 2005 and 2006. And then Sony and all the other equipment manufacturers went back to building new MDLP hardware until about 2008 or so. The new bookshelf systems that they introduced in Japan stayed on sale until about 2013. The portable equipment was discontinued about in 2011, minus a couple stragglers. In particular, Teak and Tascam built a deck, which was a fast stubber through to 2020, and it only ran out in 2021. The discs themselves, actually the disc that I used here, is still on sale. That disc was made in 2022. That brings me to the modern environment, which is that there's a small revival happening. There's a convention where we're doing a little better at answering questions than presenting it all in one package here. So again, my apologies. There's new software, new NetMD software has been developed where you can use a Chromium-based web browser to just drag files onto it. You can, of course, still do all the other experiences such as live recording or recording off of a microphone. And the new discs are still being made. There's some new stuff happening in terms of customizing labels for discs and doing UV printing. You may have seen there's a lot of releases on Bandcamp. That's MiniDisc. I'm so sorry. Does anyone have questions, or did I say anything way too fast? Yes.
Did you
So I was.
Oh.
I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I didn't raise my hand.
You first and then you.
So I was in the radio broadcast industry, and we had several stations that used MiniDisc professional players. Do you have any comments on any of the professional equipment that was out there? I still have some of the stations that I worked with discontinued use of it professionally, but I still have some of their products.
Yeah. I actually have a handful of the different machines. So that's a point that I didn't say is any audio recording you can do on MiniDisc. Not all pro use cases are made the same. And so you might not necessarily go record the sound effects for a movie on MiniDisc, but you sure can do a radio interview, or you can prepare a song for playback for radio, or the other adjacent use case to that one is performance spaces, or performances in the sense of plays, or honestly sports games. I have a couple of the Pro discs. They're all the same, but they were labeled for professional use. I've got a couple Pro discs at home that were announcements and sound effects from a basketball game at like a high school in 1999. So that was one place where it did catch on globally. I don't know what the proportions were in terms of like number of consumer people buying CD players versus mini disc players versus those use cases in Pro. But the recordability, the flexibility, and sounding good enough, yeah, definitely. Okay, and then
We talked about anti-skip and those kind of mechanisms, so what contributed to making them robust?
yeah, the main thing, one, smaller. That doesn't actually do anything other than just making it easier to carry it. This machine has a couple different things. The first part, right from 1992, is that all mini-disc hardware has a memory buffer. Originally, it was 10 seconds worth of standard play audio. And then in 1998, they went to 40 seconds. And as part of the long play, because that data rate is lower, more audio can fit in the memory buffer. So this machine, whatever 40 times 4 is how long, if you're using that long format, worth of audio you can skip or preserve in the memory. The other part that they added, I think actually both of these machines have it, G protection, is an anti-vibration technology. So skip protection helps if the laser loses focus and you can't read what's next on the disc. G protection tries to make it so that the laser doesn't lose focus. So it's kind of a couple different technologies, and I'm sure Sharp and Panasonic had their own. But I don't know offhand what they called it or the technical details. Anything? Oh, sorry.
When transferring over, is there a possibility to mess with the playback? Because how usually when you're in between songs, some kind of mesh together.
Oh yeah. You're talking about gapless CDs. I think Linkin Park Meteora has a couple tracks that blend into each other. There's a bunch of them, like Pink Floyd.
I was gonna say Fever You Can't Split Out has 4, so it goes from the intro straight into just a straight beat to one of the other songs, So it kind of just eases into it, right? So I believe playback is what's called.
Yeah. The scene term for that is gapless, and I don't know if that's the industry term or if that's common elsewhere. It depends on how you make your disc. If you do it this way, and you actually see this, maybe you don't see, that says 5 on it, and that says 5 over here. When you transfer with optical, you get gapless. So if you copy a CD directly, a couple of the pieces of Pro equipment, actually that Tascam model that was being built until 2020, is one of them that intentionally inserts gaps because you don't necessarily want the first bit of that next song to come through if you're broadcasting it on a radio station or at a basketball game. NetMD, kind of. The original software, if you tell Sony's software up front, this CD is gapless, it'll rip the whole thing as a single file and then split it. The modern software, most of it is slightly less good at that. But there's a couple workarounds, so it kind of depends on what experience you want and what problems you want. But the typical gap, if you're doing a method that produces a gap, is just a couple milliseconds.
Yeah, I was gonna see if there's any way to mess with the transition of each song. That's what I was kind of thinking.
Oh, it's also actually, some of the machines can do that customization. There's fade in and fade out, mostly on the stationary, like home decks. And I don't know if it's possible once the tracks are recorded to shift one into the other. So if you wanted to do that, what you would end up doing is building your mix on your computer and recording it and then adding track marks by hand. Or splitting the files and burning them to a CD and letting the CD take care of it. So there's a couple ways if you're doing custom mixtapes with that level of details.
You mentioned earlier that there were some mini discs labeled as for professionals. Were there any differences between those at all, or was it just purely labeling and marketing?
Literally no. Yeah, it was it was purely marketing. Allegedly, some of the most expensive discs have like marginally lower error rates. But that's like you're paying $30 for a disc in 1998 when the going rate's 2. So, and ultimately, what you're going to get out of them will sound the same unless something's really wrong with either the disc or the machine. So, but some of them can be fun. There's one that a lot of people like called the MD2000, and it's made out of magnesium, I think. You can, if you don't like 300 of your dollars, you can go on eBay and get one. I don't I mean, to be honest, this is the worst example because, sorry, you know how back in like 2004 you could buy CDs that looked like vinyl or like pink and blue CDs and that kind of stuff? That was MiniDisc in Japan. There's thousands of unique designs, and they were at the dollar store or at the gas station or whatever. And some Japanese like dollar store and convenience store brands had their own discs. That actually happened very minor in Europe. There's like a French convenience store chain that had its own. But almost nothing happened in the US in terms of custom house branded discs. We did get some variety, like you could buy the Maxell color collections or the Sony color collections or the Pro discs, but not thousands. There's a couple hundred varieties in the US. Sorry.
The DVD system was countrified with you could only play certain DVDs in certain countries. Did this system have that? Because you mentioned Europe versus the US and Japan.
It did not have, the discs themselves weren't regional in terms of the technology. In fact, a pretty common way to get some mini disc hardware a little cheaper is to just buy it from Japan. And depending on what you buy, it does or doesn't need a 100 volt step down converter. In terms of, so really the regional differences were just down to what was being sold or what Sony or whatever manufacturer thought they could get away with selling. And getting away is probably the wrong term. It's more like what the local tastes are. Well, actually, this is a good example. Oh, wow. This machine only sold everywhere outside of Japan because in Japan, people buying in Japan didn't want to deal with something that was thicker like this. This is where a AA battery goes in under where the disc is inside the machine. In Japan, they used a semi-custom battery format referred to as gumstick, which makes their recorders a little thinner. The other thing we got was much more focus on NetMD here in the US. So there were a couple machines that are only NetMD burners. They have a USB port, a headphone port, and nothing else. Japan got one of those. We got like 5 to 10-ish, depending on how you count it. So regional variations, yes, but no like locking or anything.
I know that in Japan, at least, there were several, or quite a few commercial releases of mini discs. So, like, an artist officially releases their music on a mini disc. Was there any of that in the U.S.?
I can't even believe I missed that. Yes, yeah. So MiniDisc, didn't mention. Wow. So I'm just going to answer 6 questions at once. I apologize. The base technology for the recordable mini discs is called magneto-optical. Sony developed that technology probably along with a couple other of its Japanese buddies in the 1980s, and it matured for use in computer data storage. I think I saw some Next cubes floating around, the black cubes. The original version of that booted exclusively off of a magneto-optical drive, as an example. There were pressed commercial releases globally. Sony did try to focus on it here in the US because they knew that, to be perfectly honest, Americans wouldn't want to deal with recording. And if buying a CD is only $10, maybe they can convince us to buy a mini disc for just a couple dollars more than that. It didn't take off an awful lot. They're pretty pricey in the collector market, and most of what people get, if they want one for troubleshooting, basically, because the pressed releases, I'm so sorry, use the underlying recording technology is the same as CD, is the other part of that. So they're more reflective, and it's easier for the old lasers to read. So people buy them as a troubleshooting tool. There's a couple samplers that shipped with magazines or just included as part of discs, or like, here's a retail demo. Those are the cheapest ones here in the US. The modern releases are almost all based off of this same recordable disc. And they get put through a UV printer, so the label looks really classy. But it's still a recordable disc under, so it kind of depends on, again, what experience you want.
If it's, since it stores just digital media and it's the same, recording format as, like the drives for the next cubes, right? Can you store non-music on a mini disc and then just retrieve that on a computer?
Sort of. There's like 5 answers to that question.
Okay.
Number one is that Sony built a dedicated format called MD Data, which uses the same physical discs, more or less, in very similar housings, but there's a couple, you know how floppy diskettes have the notch that tell you, like, this is a 1.4 meg floppy disk. MiniDisc had something similar, where different notches mean different things to the machines. And there was a computer drive for that. You could buy, it was SCSI, and I believe there was maybe an IDE one. No, we were saying that there was not. Okay, sorry. And it had drivers for Mac System 7 and Windows 95 and 3.1, but not much else. And this was before the days of like standardized block storage device like we've got on USB, where you can go to Walmart and buy a big 2 terabyte hard drive and plug it into a 30-year-old computer and it works. 20. The next answer to that question is that HiMD massively increased the focus on data storage. So HiMD shows up as a fat file system in your file browser, whether that's a Mac, a PC, etc., etc. The third answer to that question is that with the modern software, it is technically possible to go, here's an A-Track 3 file. A-Track 3 is the codec for long play, and send it through, and it'll just dump it on the disk. The fourth answer of that question is that one of our developer friends, who's not here yet, but he'll be here tomorrow, I think, if you drop by the room, has a GitHub repo for a Fuse file system for MiniDisc, which is incredibly cursed. But it uses the same, we call it the homebrew mode, where certain of the machines have exploitable firmware, so you can do some different stuff. So like ripping is now possible, or storing random data on the disks. Is there anyone from this side of the room? I'm sorry, I'm only looking at the one side of the room.
What was the software you just mentioned that you could also, is on homebrew that you could rip?
Oh yeah, the main one. I'm so sorry. The main one is Web MiniDisc Pro. If you go to the website minidisc.wiki, on one of the sidebars, there will be a link to the Web MiniDisc Pro guide, and it shows what hardware models work with it, because it's a pretty limited, I say pretty limited, there's like 15 machines that work with it. And what it does is it asks for permission. So you tell it, I want to rip a disk. It asks for permission because it is not official Sony code, and then enters the homebrew mode, and some stuff that I don't know because I'm not a developer, and then you get raw A-Track file out the other side. Depending on what your source is, that may or may not be good or worse than how it sounds on when you just play your disc on the machine. The reason I say that is because the modern 8-track codecs on computers are all open source and best effort and haven't been updated in a few years. For long play, there's some workarounds, but for standard play stuff, it depends on what you need. The other main way that I exfiltrate audio from mini discs is in Japan, you could buy what's called an SCMS stripper to remove the copyright status from the digital audio signal, and you can just at that point record it into like a CD recorder, or to be honest, most computer digital audio inputs don't respect that status anyway, so you can just open up GarageBand and hit play and then preserve whatever's on a mini disc that way. Does that help?
It does, yeah. I'm curious too, could you input the encode or the codec into FFmpeg and then transfer it as a more deliverable file format that way?
Yes. FFmpeg is one of the modern open source implementations that includes 8-track. FFmpeg is one. VLC has its own, and I don't know if it's actually based on FFmpeg. And there's a dedicated one called 8-track Denk. The other keyword, if you want it, is AT3 tool. And that tool will let you transcode LP files, and it's an official, it's a Sony tool, so they'll sound basically their best if you use that one.
Do you have these resources, real quick, not to interrupt, these resources and links on a website you author, maintain, or anything?
Do I
You
ever?
mentioned several, okay.
The website that I run is StenoWeb, S like Sierra, T like Tango, E, N, November, O, Oscar, W, E, Echo, B, Bravo, .net. And that page looks like it was authored by Dreamweaver MX, because it was. So, actually, I took the template out of Dreamweaver MX and ran it on my modern computer, but don't tell. On there, I have a heading at the top that says MiniDisc. On that page, I've linked to a couple of my own personal resources, a couple external resources that sometimes explain stuff better than me, a couple of the social hubs, as well as the written text version of what this talk was supposed to be. So the actual words that I wrote and couldn't remember today, so apologies for that. Anyone?
You mentioned copyright protection on there. I was just wondering what forms of copyright protection the MiniDisc had.
Oh my God, would you believe that I spent some time last night reading the Audio Home Recording Act of 1992? Because I did, and I forgot about it entirely. So, in 1987, Sony released a new technology called digital audio tape, which you may or may not have heard of. It's lossless, slightly higher quality than CD. The original idea was that that was going to be the replacement for the analog compact cassette. Digital audio tape mostly ended up finding use cases in pro markets, but as part of the lead up to that, you can imagine that the RIAA was not super duper ultra happy about that. The compromise that they came to happened in Athens, Greece in 1989 with the introduction of a technology called the Serial Copy Management System. And this was an informal industry agreement. I mean, it was probably pretty formal, but it was an industry agreement. It was not legislated anywhere at the time, or at least in the US. Basically saying Sony could proceed building and selling digital audio recording hardware to consumers so long as SCMS gets used. What SCMS does is use some of the additional data channels in a digital audio stream to decide whether or not it should allow recording based on what the source is and what the recording status is. As an example here, because this is coming from a CD player into a mini disc machine, the CD player says, "I'm a CD player," and they always say, "This is an original," regardless of whether or not it's actually an original. So you're allowed to make this copy. This is by that agreement enshrined in law. Well, not law yet. Then, if you take this disc out and you put it in a home deck that has a digital output and you route that digital output right back into this same machine, it'll go, no, you can't copy that. It's a second generation copy and that's not allowed. There's a couple technicalities that you can run into based on that. For example, as part of their efforts to integrate with computers in like 1998 to 2001, before the launch of NetMD, they bundled a Toslink sound card with some of the machines. Those don't send I'm a CD player. They send something that doesn't trigger the copyright status on that first generation. But then once you've reached the third generation, it will say no because the source is a MiniDisc machine at that point. So what the SCMS stripper that I mentioned earlier does is it just manipulates those statuses and goes, I don't know what this is. This is definitely original, because that's pretty trivial for a microcontroller to do in like 1990. Anyway, Audio Home Recording Act, that agreement happened in 1989. Sony starts adding SCMS to all of its digital audio recorders, both DAT and MiniDisc, and Philips added it to digital compact cassette. And then in 1991, songwriter Sammy Kahn sues anyway, resulting in the American legislation known as AHRA 92, or Audio Home Recording Act of 1992, which was signed into law in October by, I believe it was George Bush at the time. And Sony and Philips both started selling their new hardware in 1992. The main thing that changes with AHRI 92 is that there's a new tax on digital recording hardware and media. The original numbers were between $2 and $6 on recorders, and up to $1, I think it's a percentage on media, with the ability for a review board to change that later. Is anyone else about to ask about MP3 players? Because I read a summary of RIA versus Diamond 1999.
No, but I'm curious about that.
I just wanted to say, I was a DAT engineer, DAT and DDS. I designed the chips for the mechanisms, control, and all that. And take DAT and you add Reed Solomon error correction, you have DDS, so that it's purely lossless. And you can recover the data on the fly. RIAA hammered us big time and tried to kill it. They lobbied Congress. Congressmen naturally made lots of money with that, backing the RIAA. Nothing got done with it. And the biggest reason for DAT that it was so good was you could actually take one DAT as a player with the original source, take 100 other DATs, and you could slave, and you could actually servo off of the master. Literally, your recorders were slaves of the first, so it was an exact duplicate because it's lossless, and that scared the RIAA to death. And in a way, it kind of killed DAT. We never, it was used in radio stations, but it was never as a product.
Well, it's like, so you mentioned you could copy a CD to a MiniDisc, and we go, oh, well, I'm the original, I'll copy, but then you can't go MiniDisc to MiniDisc because it would be the original. But that doesn't really stop piracy. I would just, if I was going to do that, I would just set up a booth with a CD player, and I would just make tons from that one CD and then sell those.
That's how they did it.
Yeah, exactly. So, like, what was the point if it doesn't actually do anything?
To make the RIA happy. It was.
Let me toss in really quickly. There was also some functionality in the fact that technically it doesn't stop you if your source on MiniDisc was an original, like if it's your own stuff. It's not marked with the copy bit.
Yeah.
So you can go infinitely with that. And it's totally one of those things that you have this going for it.
So he's alluding to what I kind of alluded to with the computer USB audio output. If you record analog or with a device that doesn't produce that status, you can then make a second generation copy of that. Okay. And there were, and this machine actually, that red port, does that show up? Mm-hmm. Is a microphone port. So you can take this to a meeting or to a concert or wherever, right? And make your own recordings of the world or yourself or your band. Those you're allowed to duplicate. But my understanding is only one generation digitally.
You can do that infinitely.
I've never tested this, so I'm
Yeah,
just going to go with
no,
what Dan says.
That was the part I was trying to get to the other day, but you can go infinite if the source is your original media, because SCMS puts two provisions in the process. Am I a DAT source or am I a CD source? Automatically lock in SCMS, so you can't make a second generation copy. If the source is also flagged as I am locked down, aka I've already made an original copy or I'm a locked source, sorry, you can't copy me. So you have two different ways that the system can be used. MiniDisc never sets that flag to effectively enable SCMS, it never sets SCMS on in the recording process if it's an original recording.
Gotcha.
When you actually go and do the playback to do, let's say, do a MiniDisc to MiniDisc recording, transfer through optical, it basically never says, hi, I am a copy locked disc. So the next version is like, oh, well, it's an unlocked source, I can just keep going again. So, yeah, if your original source never spans either a copy bit or that I'm a CD or a DAP, you can go infinitely basically. The other thing is you can just split your optical signal to as many copiers as you want simultaneously too.
One more hijack, if I may. When this all was going on with the RIAA, the yen was strong, and Japanese were buying up institutions like Pebble Beach. Sony got tired of it, and they said, okay, we'll just buy your labels, we'll buy your studios. Sony Pictures, Sony Music, Sony Entertainment came to be. And that's, why would they buy MGM or Columbia or whatever label? That's why. Why battle Congress when you could just sell the property?
That's a really great point. Thank you. I always forget that piece. Anything else?
Yeah, so I kind of looked at PSP, and they use UMDs. Are those possibly similar to MiniDiscs in any way, or?
No.
They are both made by Sony. They are both encased in plastic, and they are both small, but otherwise, no. UMDs based on digital video disc, DVD, which uses a red, is it red laser?
Well, I was actually, there a little bit that also is, we can say there is a similarity. PSP uses 8-track encoded audio for almost all of the audio sources, whether it's in-game audio, an audio disc, which are extremely rare, and the movie discs inside of the MPEG-2 stream. But, yeah.
I did not.
I don't know what the laser is. Sorry about that, Mark.
It is a DVD laser. I just don't remember which color DVD lasers are. It's like CD.
DVDs are red because
Red.
Blu-rays went to blue afterwards.
There it is. Yeah, CD lasers white, DVD lasers red, Blu-ray lasers blue, and I think HD DVDs blue or bluish as well.
Yeah, it was slightly different wavelength of blue, so you could get it tighter, so you could get more data on there. And then HD DVD lost to Blu-ray for some reason, even though it had better audio quality.
I won't address that comment because I actually don't know.
Just a random question with this. So that's mostly for the transference of audio. So you can you listen to audio? Like, is there like a jack in like your headphones?
Yes. Do you mean on the CD player or on the MiniDisc machine?
On the MiniDisc.
Yeah. Oh.
That works.
Yeah, actually, so I didn't show this. This is the remote control for this machine. Sony shipped headphones with pretty short cables at the time, which was the style at Japan because in Japan everyone put their machines in little bags and then put them in their side bags or whatever. And so you clip this remote on your lapel. But yeah, it's just a headphone jack under there. Or on the... Oh my god, that's terrible. You'll just have to believe me that there's a headphone jack on there. And it's just a normal 3.5 millimeter. To be honest, most of the equipment works well with like iPod style headphones that have the extra connector. There's just a couple machines that don't. In which case, you'd have to like either get an adapter or get like old style headphones that don't have a microphone.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, is if it was a 2-pole or a 3-pole jack.
It is regular stereo,
PRS.
which I think is just 3. Is that 3?
Yeah, it's 3. You're thinking the 4-pole,
Four pole,
which is
3 pole,
four
and 4
valves.
pole, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
One of them.
But yeah, 4-pin headphone jacks work fine. I use iPod headphones all the time. The wired ones for mine.
Okay.
Our disc finished. I don't even remember what this is. Under the Influence of Giants.
MiniDisc copy.
Yeah, exactly. Does anyone want this? No. I mean, yeah, actually. Do you? You can have it. This is one of the new discs that are cheap. Come visit me after.
Do you have any extra mini discs by chance?
I do, yeah, like if you want one. I'm in the MiniDisc Con room over in the, like, closer to the main show. And I have a couple of the ones. I've got one. Okay, so one for you. Come visit me. But I don't have the rest. I don't have that many. I'm so sorry, everyone. Although, if you haven't yet, and you have a mini disc machine with you, and you drop by the room, there is a disc where you can hear a slightly more prepared version of this talk that you can get, and that's UV printed. And I wish I had brought a copy. That would have been cool. Whatever.
Wouldn't have called me made much unless it has the software.
I have a copy of it on me.
Oh, if you have some time and want, I say have some time, like we're all here. I don't know if anyone has this room after. While that's in progress, I mentioned the Diamond Multimedia versus RIAA, which I believe is 1999. It's the only case to ever reference AHRA, and the whole idea was, thank you, this is the disc. And that's the same disc as, oh no, actually this is a different type of disc. I don't know what, maybe it is very similar. Regardless, this is kind of what the UV printing looks like.
It's actually on the disc.
Yeah, it's printed, it's not a sticker. The original pressed discs, because they didn't need to get written, didn't have a shutter on the front, so the art was the full size, and that's kind of the thought process behind making them like this. Is to get closer to that original, like, pressed release style. Oh no, how does this go in? I normally use the I normally use these, so these little jewel cases are like a mystery to me. Thank you so much. UV discs. Oh yeah. The main relationship between Diamond versus RIAA and AHRI 92 is that Diamond Multimedia wasn't paying the fees that were supposed to go into a recording artist fund on the Diamond Rio MP3 player, which they argued they were exempt from because it's not a recorder, because it doesn't have an audio input. And they were correct. Which paved the way for all the other digital audio players.
You mentioned something earlier about MP3s and how they were connected to mini discs, and then I think you got changed the train of thought. I was just curious where you were going to go with that.
Oh, did I say the words file orientation?
No, I don't think so.
No. That's probably what I meant. The whole idea of file orientation is basically, in the early 2000s, most people were using their computers to manage their music libraries instead of keeping giant piles of CDs around. And I realize individual experiences will have changed. Me being the kind of person who now has a giant CD changer at my house.
I have a 400 disc changer.
Nice.
They load up like a jukebox and then it grabs them and it's super cool.
It's a very neat technology.
I have a Sony one that does 400 Blu-rays as well.
I remember seeing that, and then I remember thinking, like, wow, what if Plex? But it was slightly before Plex was reasonable.
Well, you could network in it and it would do the thing where it would pull up the information in the movie for you automatically.
That's hilarious. There were computer drive versions of these. Dan actually had one or two. They were available in CD-ROM.
CD, DVD, and DVD RAM. I believe there was, on top of that, they also made full full size, like, put them in a rack and a single changer basically that runs the whole damn thing.
Oh yeah, like my 400 Blu-ray changer, it's like this big and it's like this tall and you stand.
No, I'm talking like full 42 rack, full of just changers that are all that work. They can either use for audio, DVD, or for
that would
computer.
be super cool.
There's some wild stuff out there, and it's these days. It's if you're interested in going down that route, both I would say there's a lot of neat things you can do connecting it to a computer, as well as in a lot of cases bringing it back into things like MiniDisc or other consumer audio.
Yeah, because I have about 3,000 movies on disc, and so.
Oh, you're the pirate.
No, I mean like legally purchased movies I've just been collecting through the years, and so I would love to just have them on my computer and not have to change them out. I don't feel like ripping them because it takes so long to make an MKV and then compress it.
Yeah.
This is not an official recommendation, but a product I've seen that may or may not help with that is called the Acro Nova NIMBY, which uses a hopper on top and a single drive in the middle and a release bin in the bottom, and you just plonk a bunch of discs in there and tell it what to do with them all. They're $800 though.
You're also looking to rip a whole bunch of stuff, just totally unrelated. The power files we're talking about are what they're referred to, sort of, they're basically just like the Sony Mega Changers, but they're for computer basically.
Okay.
There is software that you can feed into that will literally do either audio ripping in bulk or DVD ripping in bulk. The drives are ancient and so forth and so on.
Power file.
Talk to me afterwards.
Yeah, I'll catch you afterwards.
Come visit us at the MD Con room if you haven't already. I know I've seen a couple people of you are there already.
I will definitely come by after the other panel thing I want to go to in a little bit, in like 15 minutes.
Sorry, I know I'm running long now.
Oh, it's fine. It's fascinating.
Anything else? I do really good answering questions and really bad giving prepared talks, so thank you guys for accommodating. Yes.
Besides eBay, do you have any like good places to get like very not well used, but like pretty good condition devices like this? Because I mean, I used to have a Sony one. I think 2 gens after that, or a gen or two. Like just say gen after that one, and it's still running. It still works. It skips on occasion.
Yes. So a favorite of the scene is to purchase stuff from Japan, and I recommend against buying off of Japanese eBay because much of Japanese eBay is relistings of domestic Japanese auction sites, Mercari and Yahoo Japan. So if you have any tooling in place that you use to buy other merch from Japan, the common ones are Bai, Zen Market from Japan. There's a couple. Bai's the one I personally use because it doesn't require that you hold a balance. I don't know anything about any of the others other than that Zen Market makes you hold a balance until you've spent like thousands of dollars with them. Anyway, what I'll say is that if you're looking for portable devices, it's really great because they ship super cheap. And recorders and some of the NetMD hardware are available cheaper in Japan than they are in the US. However, if you're looking for pure NetMD, the cost to ship a Japanese NetMD portable is roughly on par with what it'll cost to buy a US one, especially given that the US ones don't need some of the semi-specialized power hardware that the Japanese ones do, like the custom batteries. So that's kind of a trade-off, and it depends on what problems and what solutions you want, if that makes sense. Yes, Dan?
I would also add that usually buying from the US, you end up with a scenario where a lot of times a lot of sellers, if they're selling from the US or Canada, the general locale, a lot of the equipment's tested and actually they can give you the status of really what it is. Buying a lot of MiniDisc from Japan, it's sometimes a gamble because a lot of stuff is listed as junk, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's bad. It just means that it's untested. You can get great deals, but who knows? And as a result, a lot of the sellers that are selling from Japan that they're listing on eBay, a lot of times they're just relisting these same auctions. So you're not really, there's no promise. Nothing's going to be any better there.
That's exactly what they're doing. my website links to a Reddit post where I found no less than 7 copies of a single Yahoo Auctions Japan item on international eBay. And that specific example is gone, but you can type almost any Japanese mini disc model in and go, it's the same pictures on like 6 auctions. But the other really good point that you may or may not have meant to make is that when you're buying stuff from Japan, there is almost explicitly never any guarantee about what you're getting. They're selling it to you as their trash. And also, because you're working through a proxy, there's pretty much no customer support for the item itself, so it's always a gamble. There's a process that we often do, I call it the clean and lube, where you pull a machine apart, you clean out the guts, and then you reapply the lubrication to all the moving parts. That often gets machines that aren't fully working or behaving marginally working better. So like if you've got like an N510 or an N710 or whatever, and that's behaving a little poorly but otherwise works fine, maybe it just needs a little clean and lube. And the instructions for that are on the wiki, minidisc.wiki, and the term that they use there is re-greasing gears is a search term. So, sorry. I don't know what time it is or what time this ends, so I'm so sorry.
It's after 3.
Oh, okay. Sorry. Do you know what's next or when next is?
315 is the actual history of the 1982 Super Bowl commercial, and then porting OS 9 to the Phoenix.
Gotcha. Okay. More important talks than mine. No, I'm just kidding. Anything else before we roll out?
Well, it's nice talking. It was nice.
Thank you so much.